For centuries, humanity had been tolerated, tested, and dismissed by the greater civilizations scattered across the stars. They looked at Earth as a backwater sphere, a latecomer fumbling into interstellar space, carrying too much history and too little power. They sent raiding fleets, sanctioned trade embargoes, and imposed treaties written to humiliate rather than negotiate. Every encounter reinforced their belief that humans would bend, complain, and ultimately submit. And for a long time, humanity played its part, wearing a mask of courtesy and measured diplomacy, speaking in careful tones while building in silence. Behind the mask, Earth was unifying. Nations that once spent centuries locked in rivalry discovered that compared to the pressure of entire empires, their divisions were trivial. Gradually, ancient borders lost their meaning as orbital stations replaced flags, and human ships became extensions of a single will: survival. Alien strategists took little notice of this shift, assuming Earth's unification was cosmetic, temporary, or fragile. They were wrong. The first warning signs had already appeared. Pirate clans backed by wealthy alien lords found themselves hunted with surgical precision. Fleets that expected to scatter poorly armed colonies instead faced coordinated traps, mines that blinded sensors, drones that swarmed reactors, and tactics borrowed from centuries of asymmetric warfare. A handful of human ships managed to force retreats from armadas 10 times their size. Records of these defeats spread through the galactic undernet, dismissed by politicians but whispered about by soldiers who had seen the brutality firsthand. Humans, it was said, fought as if they had nothing to lose, and that kind of enemy was unpredictable. Still, the empires pressed forward. To them, humans were amusing at best, irritating at worst. They underestimated the weight of history that shaped Earth. A species forged through plagues, famine, endless conflict, and the shadow of nuclear fire carried a patience that others mistook for weakness. Courtesy was not surrender, it was restraint. The raiders believed they had broken humanity each time they extracted resources or claimed tribute, never realizing that every insult, every loss, every atrocity was being counted and remembered. It was during one of these so-called enforcement actions that the mask finally cracked. A coalition of alien powers attempted a blockade of Earth's outer colonies, expecting compliance. Instead, they encountered silence on official channels. Then a transmission emerged, broadcast not only to the blockading fleet but deliberately routed across every known communications hub in the galaxy. The voice that carried it was steady, calm, and impossibly cold. "Stop attacking," it said, "or we stop pretending to be courteous." The words alone were simple, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. This was not a plea, not even a negotiation. It was a declaration that the patience of an entire species had reached its end. The message made no threats, listed no consequences, and described no conditions. Yet the silence that followed was more terrifying than any elaborate ultimatum. Because every commander, every diplomat, every merchant who heard it understood the implication: humanity would no longer restrain itself. In the span of minutes, the transmission was dissected, debated, and replayed across countless worlds. Some called it bluff, an act of desperation from a species cornered. Others, those who had seen human fleets fight with ruthless efficiency, recognized it for what it was: the calm before a storm. Earth had offered the galaxy a chance to reconsider, one last warning dressed in the simplest possible language. What gave the words power was not what they said, but who said them. Humanity had learned through centuries of survival that promises meant little unless backed by action. When humans declared a line, it was never empty rhetoric. It meant plans had been drawn, weapons positioned, contingencies prepared. The broadcast was not a threat, it was notice. For the first time, alien leaders realized that perhaps humanity's courtesy had been a deliberate strategy all along, a way to buy time, to study weaknesses, to prepare a response so devastating that once unleashed, there would be no undoing it. And if that was true, then the galaxy had just been placed on the edge of a precipice. The tipping point had been reached. What happened next would decide whether the stars witnessed coexistence or catastrophe. And the decision was no longer in alien hands. It was in humanity's. The message from Earth spread faster than any fleet could travel. Within hours, it was replayed in the war rooms of empires, on the floors of legislatures, in the smoky corners of trade guilds, and on the data streams that carried gossip from one system to another. The phrasing was dissected like scripture. Why had humans chosen those words? What did "stop pretending to be courteous" truly mean? No empire could afford to ignore it, because in those few lines lay either the possibility of peace or the certainty of retaliation. In the chambers of the elder races, laughter echoed first. To them, the statement was arrogance. They had heard countless species swear vengeance, plead for autonomy, or declare themselves sovereign before being conquered. None had succeeded. The humans, they believed, would follow the same pattern: bold talk, swift punishment, and eventual assimilation. Entire histories of crushed rebellions seemed to validate that belief. Yet beneath the laughter lingered unease, because the humans were not following the usual script. They had not begged for mercy, nor did they threaten in colorful language. They simply announced that restraint was ending. Soldiers recognized the difference first. Veterans who had faced humans in skirmishes sent warnings up the chain of command. They spoke of ships that fought until their hulls were half vaporized, of boarding actions where humans fought hand to hand long after defeat was certain, of colonies that sabotaged entire infrastructure grids to deny the enemy resources. These were not the acts of a species clinging to survival. They were the tactics of a people who had learned to weaponize desperation itself. To soldiers, the message was no bluff. It was confirmation of what they had already feared. Merchants and civilians reacted differently. On frontier worlds where human traders had become common, the tone shifted overnight. Partners who once treated humans as amusing novelties began to reconsider contracts and tighten security. Rumors spread that Earth possessed secret weapons, that their scientists had uncovered technologies hidden from the wider galaxy, that their fleets had grown stronger in silence. Some dismissed these as paranoia, but others recalled how many times humanity had pulled victories from improbable situations. Markets wavered as investors quietly withdrew from ventures involving human colonies, fearing retaliation that could devastate supply lines. Diplomatic halls grew tense. Factions that had participated in blockades suddenly found themselves questioned by allies who wondered if they had gone too far. The prospect of humans abandoning courtesy raised questions that unsettled even the most confident. Courtesy had meant treaties, negotiation tables, compliance with protocols, and the willingness to send delegates rather than missiles. Without that, what remained? The answer frightened them: only raw defiance. Not every empire hesitated. Some rulers saw an opportunity to demonstrate dominance by crushing Earth publicly, turning its warning into a lesson for every other minor species. Plans for punitive expeditions were drawn, fleets assembled, and propaganda prepared. Yet even these empires debated behind closed doors, for they had seen the reports of human ingenuity. They knew that attacking might win them territory, but at costs no accountant could justify. What unsettled them most was not the threat of defeat, but the possibility of chaos. Humanity was unpredictable. They had no ancient caste system, no rigid hierarchy that kept behavior consistent. Their strength came from adaptability, from countless strategies born of crisis. If they decided to abandon restraint, there was no clear path to containing the consequences. Some feared that even if humans were destroyed, they would take entire civilizations down with them in a spiral of vengeance. Across neutral systems, whispers grew that Earth's message was more than defiance, it was a pivot in history. For ages, the galactic order had relied on intimidation to maintain control. Now, one of the smallest and newest players had dared to challenge that order openly. Even if the humans were defeated, their warning would linger as a seed in the minds of other species tired of submission. The precedent alone was dangerous. And so, the galaxy found itself suspended between mockery and fear, between aggression and hesitation. Every empire, every faction, every merchant consortium understood the stakes differently, but none could deny that something fundamental had shifted. Humanity had declared its patience finished, and whether the galaxy laughed or trembled, they all knew the same truth: words like those are never spoken without preparation to act on them. Humanity's warning did not emerge from a vacuum. It was not born of sudden anger or reckless pride. It was the product of a history etched deep into the marrow of a species that had spent millennia walking the razor's edge between survival and annihilation. To understand the weight of their words, one needed only to look at the chronicles of Earth itself. From the moment humans began forging tribes, they fought over territory, resources, and belief. Conflict was not an aberration but a constant teacher, shaping minds to anticipate betrayal and plan for it. Empires rose and fell in cycles of conquest and collapse, each leaving behind lessons in both hubris and resilience. Civilizations that underestimated the will of smaller foes were toppled, while oppressed peoples endured until they overturned their masters. Humanity carried those lessons forward, internalized them, and never forgot them. When they discovered gunpowder, wars transformed from skirmishes to global conflicts. When they split the atom, deterrence became doctrine. For centuries, humanity lived beneath the shadow of extinction by its own hand, relying on restraint, calculation, and the grim understanding that survival often depended on never showing weakness. The Cold War etched into their collective psyche a paradox that would define their dealings with alien empires: speak softly when possible, but prepare weapons that make silence intolerable to break. Aliens saw courtesy as weakness because they lacked this history. For many galactic powers, expansion had been uncontested, their supremacy unchallenged by equals. They could not comprehend a culture that had stared into the abyss of nuclear fire and chosen not to blink. To them, diplomacy was posturing. To humans, diplomacy was a shield to buy time, a mask that concealed the iron beneath. Courtesy was never surrender. It was discipline, honed through centuries of facing enemies too powerful to fight directly. This difference in perspective was why the warning landed with such force. Other species had bluffed, screamed, or cursed when cornered. Humans simply invoked the end of courtesy. It echoed the way past generations had spoken before revolutions, before uprisings, before moments when patience cracked and entire orders collapsed. The words carried the weight of countless leaders who had once declared that lines had been crossed, from city-states that resisted empires to nations that refused to kneel before tyrants. What made humanity dangerous was not their technology alone, nor the size of their fleets, but their cultural memory of endurance. They knew what it meant to be underestimated. They had spent their earliest centuries resisting colonization, exploitation, and suppression from within their own species. Time and again, stronger powers had dismissed them, only to be ground down by persistence that outlasted armies and crushed expectations. That memory was now directed outward, toward civilizations that mistook diplomacy for capitulation. The galaxy had never faced a species whose entire existence was an archive of escalation. Humans had mastered the art of fighting with nothing, turning scarcity into innovation. They had turned desperation into strategy, turning battlefields into proving grounds for survival itself. Behind every polite ambassador's smile lay generations of people who had survived sieges, genocides, invasions, and occupations, and who had written survival into their identity. The warning, therefore, was more than a message, it was history speaking through them. When humanity said it would no longer pretend to be courteous, it was not the outburst of a cornered species. It was the voice of centuries declaring that the mask had served its purpose, and the time for restraint was over. Alien leaders who studied human history understood this better than their peers. Those who took the time to examine Earth's records saw the recurring pattern. Every attempt to suppress humans ended in upheaval, rebellion, or a transformation that made them stronger. They realized too late that courtesy was the buffer preventing that cycle from igniting on a galactic scale. With the mask removed, nothing restrained the instincts that had carried humanity through every age of fire. That was the true weight of the warning. It was not a demand. It was a declaration that patience had run its course, and history would now repeat itself. Only this time, not on a single planet, but across the stars. The warning was not meant as theater. It was a line drawn, and inevitably someone would test whether it could be crossed. An ambitious coalition believed humanity's words would bluff and sought to prove it. Their fleets moved against an outer colony, expecting swift capitulation. Instead, they triggered the moment Earth had promised, the end of restraint. Human forces did not meet them head-on in ceremonial battles. They struck with precision, attacking the gaps that alien commanders had never considered weaknesses. Communications relays vanished in coordinated pulses of interference, cutting entire armadas off from one another. Supply convoys disintegrated in flashes of sabotage, as civilian-looking ships revealed concealed weaponry that targeted engines and reactors. Viruses seeded into alien systems months earlier came alive, shutting down targeting arrays, scrambling navigational data, and forcing crews to fight blind. Every move was calculated to inflict maximum damage with minimal exposure. Humanity did not seek conquest of territory but destruction of confidence. Enemy captains, confident in superior numbers, suddenly found themselves stranded, adrift, or ambushed by swarms of drones too numerous to track. Entire squadrons fired upon phantom signatures, wasting ammunition on decoys while hidden torpedoes gutted their flagships. What unnerved them most was the silence. Human forces offer no boasts, no ultimatums during combat, only decisive strikes, executed with merciless efficiency. When boarding actions occurred, they revealed another truth. Humans had no intention of sparing pride or morale. They dismantled systems, destroyed stockpiles, and left ships crippled but intact enough for survivors to carry warnings home. Those who fought against them returned with stories of relentless opponents who exploited every weakness without hesitation. The galaxy's most disciplined fleets now whispered of an enemy that fought not to win territory but to leave scars so deep they would never fade. The consequences rippled quickly. Civilian routes once thought secure were suddenly unsafe, because humans had shown they could disrupt trade with surgical precision. Strategic hubs felt pressure as rumors spread of sabotage that could strike anywhere, anytime. Even powers uninvolved in the initial attack began recalculating the cost of confrontation. Courtesy had ended, and in its place stood a doctrine of calculated retaliation. What unsettled alien strategists most was the creativity. They had expected brute force, yet humans wielded unpredictability as their primary weapon. Asteroids were shifted into shipping lanes at exact moments to cripple logistics. Gravitational anomalies were exploited to funnel enemy fleets into traps. Entire data networks collapsed under waves of misinformation, leaving planets unsure whether they were truly under attack or simply paralyzed by rumor. The humans were teaching the galaxy that war against them would not follow any predictable pattern. The coalition that had dismissed Earth's ultimatum suffered defeats, too public to be hidden. Broadcasts of burning fleets and disabled flagships spread across neutral systems. Propaganda could not erase the fact that supposedly invincible armadas had been dismantled by a species barely a century into interstellar expansion. The credibility of those empires eroded, and their rivals took notice. For humanity, the victory was not measured in territory gained but in the message delivered. The mask of courtesy was gone, and with it the galaxy's illusion of superiority. Every destroyed ship, every failed blockade, every crippled convoy was proof that humanity had chosen defiance over submission. They had no interest in conquest, yet they made clear that those who raised a hand against Earth would bleed for it. The warning had been tested, and the response revealed that the line was real. Humanity would not be intimidated, would not be cowed, and would not return to the polite restraint that once kept them contained. Courtesy was gone, and in its absence lay a clarity sharper than any blade. Humanity would fight until their enemies no longer doubted their right to exist. The aftermath of humanity's unmasking left the galaxy unsettled in ways no empire could have predicted. Fleets once confident in overwhelming numbers returned home broken, their commanders disgraced. Those who had ordered the attack faced not only military failure but political crisis, for their gamble had exposed a weakness long concealed beneath centuries of dominance. The illusion that humanity was insignificant had shattered. Across the stars, councils convened in panic. Some demanded immediate peace, fearing that further escalation would trigger retaliation too costly to endure. Others, pride wounded and reputations at stake, argued for doubling efforts, convinced that humanity's defiance could not go unanswered. But even among the most hawkish voices, hesitation bled through. The losses already sustained had demonstrated that victory was possible only at costs no empire could justify. In markets and guilds, fear took another form. Merchants saw trade disrupted, convoys scattered, and profit margins evaporating. Insurance for routes near human colonies soared until even the boldest captains refused the contracts. Neutral factions, once indifferent, now clamored for treaties to protect their own economies from collapse. Humanity had proven a simple truth: to attack them was to invite chaos that rippled far beyond the battlefield. Diplomats arrived with proposals, but Earth no longer played the same game. Gone were the carefully worded concessions, the quiet compromises, the willingness to endure insults for the sake of cooperation. Humanity's representatives spoke with clarity that could not be softened: respect our sovereignty, cease aggression, or face the certainty of destruction. There was no threat in their tone, only certainty, and that certainty carried more weight than the grandiose declarations of entire empires. What unsettled the galaxy most was humanity's refusal to expand into an empire of their own. They demanded no colony seized from enemies, no tributes, no vassals. Their goal was singular: to exist without interference. This baffled powers accustomed to domination. To them, the point of war was conquest. To humanity, war was survival, nothing more. This refusal to play by familiar rules made them unpredictable and dangerous. If they could not be bribed with territory or intimidated with power, then only respect could keep them at bay. The cultural shock spread further still. On worlds far from the front, ordinary citizens whispered of humanity's resolve. Stories circulated of fleets dismantled, of commanders humiliated, of a people who would rather burn their own skies than bow. For a species long suppressed by galactic overlords, these tales ignited a dangerous idea: that defiance was not hopeless. Even if they lacked humanity's history, they now had humanity's example, and examples are more contagious than fleets. In the halls of Earth, there was no celebration, only resolve. Humanity had not sought this war, but once it came, they had chosen to end pretense forever. Leaders spoke not of triumph but of vigilance, knowing the galaxy would continue testing them. The difference now was that every potential aggressor had seen the consequences. Courtesy would never again be mistaken for weakness. The warning echoed in every archive and every military doctrine, replayed endlessly in classrooms, war colleges, and political chambers. Stop attacking or we stop pretending to be courteous. The words became more than a broadcast, they became a doctrine. For Earth, it was a statement of identity. For the galaxy, it was a reminder that humanity's patience had limits, and those limits had been reached. What followed was a fragile equilibrium. Some powers signed accords, seeking stability. Others seethed, vowing revenge but unwilling to test the line again so soon. Rival empires watched carefully, knowing that if humanity could humble one coalition, they could humble others. The balance of power tilted, not through conquest, but through fear of awakening a force that thrived when underestimated. In the end, the galaxy did not bow to Earth, nor did Earth demand it. Instead, a new understanding emerged, one written not in treaties but in memory, that humanity was not to be provoked lightly. They had shown the universe what happened when courtesy was withdrawn, and that knowledge would shape every decision, every strategy, every cautious word spoken in their presence. And so, Earth's last warning lingered in the silence between stars. It was not a threat but a truth carved into the future. Humanity would endure, humanity would fight, and when pushed beyond patience, humanity would remind the galaxy why survival had always been their greatest weapon.